Hello, everyone. We are here today with a panel that is called Post-Pandemic Resurgence, XR in China and the US. And basically, we're going to be discussing exactly what the title sounds like, kind of seeing how different responses to the pandemic have yielded different impacts in XR and emerging technologies in general. And we have some incredible experts here to speak to that topic. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I'll move in, from my right on the Brady Bunch frame. So Eddie, I'll throw to you first.
Hi, my name is Eddie Low. I'm the founder of a Beijing-based creative XR studio called Sandman Studio. I'm also the founder and director of China's biggest immersive media festival called Sandbox Immersive Festival. The festival has been running for 2 years in 2018 and 2019, and we actually skipped 2020 because of COVID, and we are preparing 2021 to be back this June. Yeah, thank you.
Which we're super excited to have Sandbox back in the picture. Flora.
I'm Flora. I'm based in China. I'm active investor in XR industry, especially in Asia market since 2017. So I've been following all the industries and XR startups very actively in China, and also a few big platforms about their strategy, about the XR and different applications. I'm doing also a lot of cross-border deals and cooperations, so looking forward to have an interesting conversation together.
Amazing. Eric?
Thank you. My name is Eric Shamlin. I'm SVP of Growth at a company called Media Monks. We're a multinational technology digital production company. My particular role is in kind of emerging tech, or what we call emerging entertainment, and so that's how emerging tech will power the next forms of popular entertainment, from TV to games to immersive XR. All things that I'm avid consumer of, and I'm just kind of happy to be here. This will be a fun conversation. I think it's one of the more relevant conversations to be had. So,
absolutely. Well, so in order to dive in, I think we should set the scene for where things were pre-pandemic. So first, I want to throw to Eddie and Flora. Could you give us a sense of where was sort of XR in China in terms of who were the major players, the studios, the startups, and just how generally were things looking before the pandemic?
Do I go first or you go first, Flora?
You go first. You are the studio, the most popular studio in China.
So before the pandemic, back in 2019, in general, I think in China market has been a follower in frontier new technologies. And in terms of AR, VR, I think a lot of companies in China are working more towards the hardware rather than software and content side. So we in China, we do have a lot of headset companies working on either PC-based devices or standalone headsets, and even post-pandemic is still similar. But I think what's interesting, to see that is pre-pandemic. I think in general the industry player has been less active comparing to post-pandemic. I think actually the pandemic has accelerated the process of people accepting this new technology. But before the pandemic, a lot of companies been very quietly working on hardwares, and there are still a few studios working on content side to be creating especially games, more towards the game side. But after the pandemic, I think a lot of things has changed, and people are more active. Generally speaking, I think that's That's what I observe. But
Yeah, I will share some of my points of view from a broader scope because I'm looking at the XR industry not only in terms of hardware, software, content, but also, in terms of entertainment, there are offline location-based entertainment centers and online. All the telecom companies and also Huawei in China start to purchase content from 2020 after pandemic. And also, I've also invested several XR companies who are focused on the industry applications in areas like education, training, industrial connection, things like that. So I think before pandemic, in my view, the XR here in China is more like a small circle, which means a lot of people whether they're investors or whether they're industry players, they regard AR, VR as a small circle or as a vertical circle, as a kind of vertical industry. But after pandemic, I realized from last year, there are, of course, in China, things are a little bit different because the government has been pushing the 5G application, and AR, VR is as an important thing. So there are a lot of money and policy support. So very obviously after pandemic, more and more people from other industries start to participate in this industry. Or in another way, they see the XR, VR not only a vertical sector, but also like a capability or technology that can improve the working efficiency or improve the entertainment experience for people in other sectors. So we see in entertainment, there are more people from animation, gaming, musical companies in China start to participate and start to do the experiment with XR studios to produce more different forms of and media. And also a lot of like the schools and the industrial players, they also try to see how to take advantage of the technology to realize something that they couldn't do before the pandemic. For example, people start to use XR to do the remote maintenance for some of the production manufacturing, and more schools start to use the immersive things because when they were online, staying at home, they find immersive environment can make their kids in a more focused environment, things like that. And I will also shortly mention another interesting point about the entertainment thing that is very interesting. Actually, before pandemic in 2019, I have met almost all of the location-based companies, founders and management in China. And they were expanding super, super crazy and fast in 2019. And a lot of them got funding. And I almost invested one of the companies. Actually, we have already issued the term sheet and intention. But then there's a pandemic. So, there are a lot of offline location-based centers were shut down in China. But then there are also someone survived. And they're upgrading. So that's also, I think, one thing that we see from pandemic. It doesn't necessarily to be bad. The location-based offline business is almost fully back to business in China since the third quarter of last year. And it's actually already booming and even increasing before the pandemic. And then also there are more and more big platforms online. They are exploring the XR media too. So that's one of the change also.
Can I have one thing to add, which is related to LBE? And I think after pandemic, post-pandemic, I think the LBE is going to be even, is going to be growing much faster than before.
Agreed. In a better way.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, I think China hasn't been has been recovering from pandemic since Q3 last year. And a lot of location-based, not only AR, VR, but also, cinemas, karaoke, all those different kinds of entertainment has been back to normal. So it's been going crazy because, during the pandemic, everybody has to, stay at home. But after when they all come back and everybody rush into those places and get their self entertained. And they also ask, they're not only enjoying the traditional forms of entertainment like films, cinemas, but they also want something new. So in China, not escape games, escape rooms, right? This kind of not only the traditional escape games, but also escape games combined with an immersive theater. Those kind of entertainment has become super popular, but also all different kinds of exhibitions. People all always go to those places. So when people come to see AR VR experiences again, and market offering the market offering right now is much better than previous years. So people start to realize, AR VR experiences can have a bigger potential. So I think those location-based LB, LB centers are now become, very attractive and popular right
Yeah,
now.
I talked to 3 major existing LB operators at the end of the year, at the end of 2020, and all of them have opened more than 50 new LBE stores in China in the second half of the year, which is really impressive. Even though the pandemic is sort of still going on here, but the business is really good. And at the beginning of this year, I've noticed there are more operators are coming to the market to open more XR related entertainment offline centers, including I think Eddie is also doing some exhibition this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's writing that I've seen about the 1918, 1919 after the 1918 flu. All of the sort of like location-based entertainment of that time, the example they used was baseball, just like shattered every record because everybody was so hungry to get back out. So I definitely agree. I think that's something that we'll be seeing internationally.
Also, the rent is raising here, so the cost is going down. That's a big benefit for them to further expand.
I didn't know that. So the rents are going down. Just
yeah, compared to before pandemic, the rents are much lower, and also there are a lot of empty space because during pandemic a lot of retailers went out, so the kind of relationship between the LB operators and the property owners and managers is kind of reversed.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Oh, interesting.
So the commercial market here, commercial rental or commercial lease market here has been upended. I read a great article about New York. New York City is basically entirely commercial rental markets, all those skyscrapers. But because of COVID and us all working from home, that's all vacant space now. And so, to be a commercial real estate developer or an investor is actually a losing proposition now in New York, whereas it used to be it was guaranteed money. But I don't know. That's I just that makes me wonder, like, that could be an amazing opportunity now for LBE and experience-based or location-based entertainment of all stripes, particularly in New York, because they're going to need renters, frankly.
Oh yeah.
So
I think it should be very significant for like a very commercial real estate market like New York, like Beijing and Shanghai, because the space per the price per unit space is very expensive before, and now because a lot of shops has moved out of the buildings and they have to lower their price. They have to lower the rent to attract them back.
Yeah. Especially before the pandemic, when I was comparing the non-LB operators in China, when I was talking to those founders, they were actually competing with their relationship with all the properties because of the rent and because of the available space. So, but things have changed a little bit after pandemic. And also, since we are all not able to travel abroad, China has very huge population. So we have to travel inside China, or we have to stay where we are inside the city. So the government and also all the tourism places are trying to create new content and new forms of media to attract people to stay here in China, and also to increase the experience, to let people spend money on it. That's also a change after the pandemic here.
That makes, that makes a ton of sense. Go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, the biggest like domestic the biggest strategy right now for the country is to promote domestic consumption. So everybody just stay here, but you should go out and to spend money.
Spend money as much as you can locally.
Yeah.
Local economies. Eric, what are you? How are you thinking about what the XR industry was in the U.S. before the pandemic?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there were a lot of the same trends or signals that Flora and Eddie talked about in China, but it's gone a completely different path. I think, and I feel like Jesse, you and I have had this conversation. Eddie and I'm sure have had this conversation. I think, say, a year and a half ago, all the conversation, at least in the XR space, was about LBE. It's the Hologates and the Dreamscapes and all these companies that were presumably doing really well and poised to sort of become sort of this next wave of consumer entertainment. That's all just gone. Just like that entire conversation just ended. A lot of those companies, I don't want to speak on any specific companies success or failure, but they all seem to be struggling. There's just, because even though the lease space is now cheaper, it's just people can't go do it, and people are suspicious of COVID and putting a mask on. There's a whole hygiene sort of paranoia around it, understandably so. So I think the whole LBE market, and that's across the entire spectrum of LBE. It was the companies I mentioned, but even the mom and pop like VR arcades that were cropping up here and there. There's actually just one like a block away from me, but then all the way up to big theme parks, and Disneyland was famously playing with some XR content. That's all sort of just gone away. It just sort of dried up and went away. I think what we've seen is kind of weirdly a bump in like at home XR though. So Oculus just recently published the top 10 or top whatever performing games in their app, and there's like whatever half a dozen have broken the $10 million range, and and so it's a surprisingly robust, still small but successful market. And the rumors are that the Quest 2 has surpassed all expectations. So the at-home market has taken off in kind of a refreshing way, and so that's great. I do think to I think Flora and Eddie's point though, that there's this craving to go out. We've all been shut in, locked in at our houses. So I think there's a desperate need to get out and go do something, right? Go enjoy your life. And so I do think those companies, if they survive, I think will have a bit of a kind of a heyday. Knock on wood, with the vaccine rolling out. Other things I've seen is, and this is something I know there's been a million articles about, is kind of virtual events. And so obviously we're doing South by Southwest panels via Zoom, and this has been sort of true of like every event over the last year, versions of this. But we've actually seen now conferences going virtual. So I've been a part of two different large scale projects where it was all done in VR. And so we had to source hundreds of Quest headsets and send them to attendees, and then create like a bespoke sort of conference or sort of entertainment / conference experience in VR. And so I don't think that's going to go away either. Like I think now all events are going to be hybridized, and so there's got to be an immersive component as well as a physical component kind of moving forward. And so those are all the signals I've been seeing. And yeah, I think a year and a half ago I would have bet the house on location-based entertainment, but we'll see. I think it'll come back, and I think actually it's good money, and Flora, I'm sure, is looking at a lot of companies in that space. But I think it's maybe a year from now, it'll be an amazing space to be in again.
Yeah, it seems like the from within, like there were a lot of best practices and hard-won lessons and things that were learned as LBEVR was kind of developing. And the unfortunate reality is that the startups themselves, you know, some pretty notable ones didn't survive it, but all the sort of the brain trust, the people that actually were kind of cracking those nuts of throughput and how to make a really rich experience with, you know, physical content with VR content, that all I think will come roaring back. Again, I agree with you that I think the vaccine will be key to that, because short of like, I can't imagine somebody being non-vaccinated and being like, sure, I'm going to put this thing that other people are putting on their face on my face as well. Okay. I also, there's something that we touched on kind of right before we started that I want to surface back here, because I think it's a really interesting point. The sort of peak period of the pandemic in China was a few months long, and the pandemic is still not under control in America, and it's closing in on a year. And I think that has impacts on that leads to potentially different impacts on the respective ecosystems. And the thing that we were talking about right before this call is that apparently in China, it was under control soon enough that remote work wasn't sort of like a forced reality the way that it was in America and in a lot of the West. How are you all thinking about impacts like that one in terms of how the pandemic actually played out and how it was sort of brought under control, and what the echoes of that might be, kind of looking down the line with how these technologies develop and the ecosystems around them?
Eddie, you're on mute, Eddie.
No, I think Flora, you should go. you should go first.
Although remote working from home in China is not compulsory and not, you know, for everyone, but still we see increasing use of Zoom or some equivalent tools in China. And also I want to mention that the question Jesse just mentioned about, I guess you want to know like the technology, how it's the XR related technology can be applied to different commercial areas after pandemic. Well, I share one of the interesting companies that I've recently invested. They are doing the digital human, which can be used inside AR, VR as avatar, but also, you know, they can do some real-time rendering and real-time live streaming on the mobile platform as well. So before pandemic, they were actually focused on the R&D and find it very hard to find the monetization route like in short time. So they had to go on R&D and wait until maybe when the AR or VR social platform came out or the consumer app came out. But then during those pandemic period in China, say from February to May or June, I would say. So e-commerce is very special in China, and that's like a huge market in China. And before that, you know, we just order online. But then during pandemic, there was a boom of the e-commerce live streaming using the avatars and some of the mocap or some facial, you know, expression AI tools to make more and more avatars or digital human or some super real life type of digital human to do the live streaming online. So that's an example of after pandemic, people are trying to use some technology used to develop or used to be used in the XR world, but now they're also expanding to see how it can be used to improve the experience in some kind of traditional experience on the mobile things. So that's one of the things that's happened in China. And also, If you look at the entertainment industry in China, I noticed from like last quarter of last year, I think, more and more all the animation companies, visual effects companies, some gaming companies, they all, and also some musical industries in China, like the Modern Sky, the biggest one, they all sort of are investing the resources and also some experiment money to try the new things. That's, I think, one thing, thanks to the more and more mature technology of the XR related, because XR is actually a very comprehensive system composing with a lot of different technologies. And also because during pandemic in China, I think all those platforms, all those companies are also thinking and trying to explore how they can create more interesting and attractive experience when people have to stay at home, or when people have to, when they cannot travel, what they can do. I think more and more new things will come out this year in China, because I know that there are several new forms of projects going on. So likely we can see the new forms in China in June, sometime like that. Yeah, and also one thing difference in China market and in US market is I think Chinese people are really good at creating ways to let people to spend money online using those different new forms of media. So yeah, we will see what's going on here this year, and we like to share more about what's going on here in China.
One thing to add is that, actually, yesterday it was the last evening of Chinese, the old year. So today is the first day of Chinese New Year. Yesterday evening there was every New Year Eve, we have a very huge television show created by China Central Television, CCTV. And so last night, during the show, they have using all different kinds of new technology to produce content for the entire audience. So every for all the shows, more than 1 billion people in China watch that TV show. And last night I saw AR, mixed reality streaming, and also virtual human. So you can see that all these kind of things, although it's not completely mature as a to consumer product, but they have been used already in different kinds of development and production, and in media production already. And so actually this create different kinds of touch point for the consumer or audience to actually get them noticed and get them realize these technology already been developed to this state. And so I think starting from this year, I think when they already know what mixed reality is and AR virtual human is, so they can dig a little bit more and to learn more about what these are and how this been developed. And I think soon we'll be able to get to a stage or point where productization of these technology will be more viable to consumer. Yeah.
Just could you add a little bit more, because I think the subject of virtual production is insanely exciting and interesting. When you talk about it being productized for consumer, you mean that there will be is what you're saying that you suspect that there'll be like kits and more DIY type of virtual production setups popping up around China?
I do think so, because virtual production right now has been used in media production, right? And I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out how we could convert those technology into a consumer experience to be deployed through whether it's new like a new media exhibition or a digital media exhibition, or some other forms. But I do think this kind of visual experience can be converted into a consumer packaged experience or exhibitions. Digital media exhibition has already been very popular, thanks to like Team Lab or those new media artists. And I think I haven't really seen a how to use real-time engine combined with mixed reality capture, how to create whether there isn't a successful example of how to create an experience for consumer yet. But I think the technology is already there. We just have to figure out how, create an experience for consumer and deploy that to the market in a financially feasible way, and to test out the market. I think there's definitely opportunity out there for that.
My view is I think there will be some new prototype products coming out this year in China, based on what I know. Because if you look at the large platforms, like Tencent is the largest social platform and also gaming company in China. At the end of last year, the founder of the whole group, Ponyma, has already announced that the 14 new trend and technology and products they are going to explore this year. The first two are XR and digital human. And my networking site said they have already prepared like 10 billion RMB at least for trying out the technology and designing the product that's available to consumers, and with their huge social platform like WeChat, and also a lot of gaming publisher things. I think they have the great channels with very large traffic, the consumers to try out a few things. That's the kind of really consumer products. And also I think some platforms are trying through a way like 2B and 2C in China, that's how we call it, which is there are a few top platforms and media groups. They are creating the virtual human reality show already for this year. So I think once that coming out, there could be more ways to see how we can not only productize that to the platform as a as a project, but also see how they can use IP, or how they can play around with all the avatars that they created inside to use that. But yeah, currently on the market, most of the monetization route for those avatars or virtual producers, it's still from like either the brands, a lot of big brands, they have money on that, and also some media groups or some big platforms like Tencent, Bilibili, TikTok, or Mango TV, or things like that. But I think at the end of the year, or not end, but in summer of this year, I think there will be some early forms of products coming out in China. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of a virtual human reality show, I'm very, very curious to see. Just
yeah,
to see that.
I have a company who is already participating in that. Once it's coming out, I like to share. Yeah.
Eric, sort of on the same subject, thinking about now our pandemic is stretched on a year. What sort of technologies are you seeing emerge that are XR adjacent, that might be kind of like a coming wave looking into 2021 and beyond?
I think it hits upon some of the stuff Flora and Eddie kind of touched upon. I think, maybe we're a little bit behind the curve on some of it, but virtual production is every other conversation right now. Like using XR technologies, real-time technologies to kind of upend traditional Hollywood creative production, creative development. Obviously, Mandalorian made a lot of headlines with how it used those technologies, but that's now getting quickly replicated by all the studios. Like Disney took a big kind of leap with that, but Netflix, Warner Brothers, they're all fast on the heels. And I had a conversation with a studio exec just the other day, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. They produce a lot of procedurals, like police crime drama shows, and right there, that's one of the most efficient things to do. Like, you know, how many walk and talks down a city street do you need to shoot? And like, you know, you can save so many dollars by just, you know, making that virtual production. And so, you know, they're getting, instead of going for like the biggest eye candy the way Mandalorian did it, they're just trying to figure out how to make it economical and efficient. And these kind of rinse and repeat TV show formats can, you know, make use of that technology in ways that, you know, maybe people didn't really think of. And then, you know, all the studios are standing those sound stages up, and, you know, our company is more in like the brand space, and the brands are going after it. Like, you know, why, you know, it used to be if you want to shoot a high-end commercial, you'd actually shoot it in like Eastern Europe, you know, and why now? You know, you can literally, you know, be in a soundstage anywhere in the world and be anywhere in the world now. So, and so we're seeing that. And what's fun is it starts to sort of merge these technologies, merge kind of industries, in that you're using these real-time technologies, which are really game technologies. It's how games have been made forever. And then you can quickly plug a headset into it. So a lot of these virtual productions now, they're prevising in XR. In, you know, like a headset is now standard kit for previs, because you can kind of virtualize the entire world, the entire set. And so Hollywood's adopted this, not even just Hollywood, brands, commercial production has adopted this technology, and it's just kind of assumed now, you know. And so that's been a kind of a really fun trend, because, you know, we, you know, all four of us have been in the space for quite a number of years and waiting for it to sort of gain adoption or traction. But it's kind of fun to see certain industries just like adopt it, and it's the air they breathe. You know, it's kind of assumed, and so that's fun, and I think that's promising for us in that these technologies are not going away. You know, I think we've all been sort of bullish on these technologies, but there's a lot of skeptics out there. We've had to weather those slings and arrows of, you know, is it a fad, or is it going to go the way of the virtual, you know, Nintendo Virtual Boy? Is it going to be that again? And, you know, I think it's proven to have lasting power. And I think because of these sort of commercial or enterprise use cases, it's giving it sort of renewed life. I think the other trend, and it's kind of related, is games. Like, we're all trapped at home, and so the video game industry has gone bananas, right? They're just making so much money right now. You know, games are selling, subscriptions are up to, you know, both Xbox and the new Xbox, the new PlayStation sold out, and was, you know, there was like eBay scammers, like, you know, selling aftermarkets. And so video games have, you know, they were already a massive industry, and it just went up from there. It's just like, it's crazy. So, and that's still, it's a convergence of these mediums, because it's, again, it's real-time technologies. You know, they're both going after XR eventually. And so I don't know, I feel like this year was kind of a watershed moment for a lot of these technologies and a lot of the adoption of these technologies. And so I think outside of that, I feel like, yeah, the success of the Oculus, you know, headset is nothing to be kind of sneezed at. And I think it's here, and, you know, with enterprise adopting these technologies, I think once we're able to freely move around again, I can only imagine it accelerating even more so.
Yeah, I totally agree. And thinking of virtual production as a means of, you know, being able to have the same exact light for an entire day and be able, like, I think what we witnessed, and this is I think a global thing, is we had all these tools, but we didn't know exactly where they fit in yet. Like we had this like big vision and these grand ideas about what we wanted it to be, and we still believe that it's going to go to those places. But the pandemic sort of instituted this need to figure out what actually can it do well, or cheaply, or efficiently, or quickly, you know, whatever it is. How do we actually use it in practice?
It's funny, just jumping in there. Yeah, I think when, like, you know, 4 years ago, the heyday or whatever of VR, everybody thought it was the holodeck. is the holodeck come true, right? It's now, but what we're seeing is kind of a decentralized holodeck or a deconstructed holodeck. It's like certain parts of it are good for this industry, certain parts are good for this industry. And so, but I think that's good. It's kind of road testing the technologies, the individual technologies in where they need to be, where they're most, to your point, most efficient, most effective, the best quality, you know. And I think you're going to have these sort of multiple parallel lines of test and iteration that at some point will converge again, and we will have the holodeck eventually.
Yeah.
We are now having all different. We are now having all different kind of small local area network LAN, and
Yeah.
someday in the future we'll have World Wide Web.
We're having our
network.
LAN parties. Yeah. Yeah, actually, but speaking of kind of the sort of like decentralized versus centralized, you know, in the West, Quest is really the only game in town when it comes to the standalone market. There are others, but in terms of what are people actually buying and where are people putting the dollars, the Quest ecosystem is where people are doing it. So this, you know, for Flora and Eddie, bring us up to speed with the standalone market in China. Who are the players? Who's kind of emerging? Like, set that scene for those who might not be familiar.
Right. I think there are quite a few headset company right now working on the new iterations of headset right now. This year, I think probably we'll have 3 or 4 different brands gonna launch their new headsets, which are, you know, 6DoF Quest equivalent, because, you know, I think most of the hardware components are already streamlined at the supply chain level. They're all going to be using XR2 Snapdragon headset chip, sorry, and also other, you know, optical components. So I think earlier this year, I think last month in January, already one headset already been announced by iQIYI. I don't know if you know about that company. They claim they state that they're a Chinese Netflix. So it's an online media platform. And they already announced their 6DoF standalone headsets. And later this year in Q2 and Q3, from my sources, there are going to be 2 different new headsets coming out. I think the hardware capacity will be almost similar, because, you know, all the components they're going to be using are pretty similar. But I think the difference is that, you know, in China we don't really have a very strong content library and content ecosystem comparing to Facebook's. And so I think that's the missing part. Even though we have, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 different Quest level headsets out there on the market, but I don't think there is a super player here. I don't think there is a lead player that can really, you know, stir the market and, you know, really attract a lot of people to buy one headset. So I think in the next 1 year or 2, maybe before Apple's, I think the market over here probably going to be a very fragmented market without a very strong lead player. Even though, you know, iQIYI is a very popular online video platform, but I think, you know, it's still going to be, you know, I think the content library and content ecosystem is still not strong enough to draw a lot of people into this pool. But hardware, I have to say, you know, everybody's been catching up with hardwares, and you know, China's very good at manufacturing, and, you know, as with streamlined supply chain, and you lower the cost to to its lowest level. But I think even though we have that, the consumer market still need content. The content is the king, and they need them in order to get the adoption rolling. So I think for the next 1 year or two, I think we still have to put a lot of effort into building content ecosystem before mass adoption gonna happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Eddie. The hardware sectors are very fragmented in China right now. There, beside the IT, Eddie just mentioned, there are another few VR headsets like Pico, Dapeng. Those are focused in China, but the thing is, there is no content there. Or the content is very limited, and most of the content is still like video oriented, not really gaming or the interactive oriented. And also, I know there's another company called Xiaopai. I'm not sure if in English it's called Pai or something.
Pimax.
Oh yeah, Pimax. I talked to their founder a few times, and amazingly, like 80 to 90% of their users and buyers are from overseas around the world, not really in China, because they are producing the like 4K and 8K very high quality VR headset for some really heavy users. And because a lot of the VR headsets in China are, their main function is still like watching the video or movies or things like that. So you could also see like there are 2 or 3 so-called AR glasses, not really the AR glasses, like the final AR glasses, but like Unreal and Yingchuang's English name, I'm not sure.
Shadow Creator.
Shadow Creator. yeah, they are also.
They're working on a new headset.
Yeah. So there are 2 or 3 AR glasses manufacturers. They also launch the AR consumer glasses, but more like on a very basic functions.
One thing to add is that the big giant tech companies in China are also working on headsets.
Oh,
yeah, like Alibaba, they've been working on headsets too. But I'm not sure when they're gonna launch a product, but they're definitely working on hardware. Yeah, and also Tencent too. But they usually come later because they're not in a rush to launch a product early.
That reminds me of a particular Silicon Valley company.
Yeah.
We have just a few quick minutes left, so I want to throw one kind of like fun prediction question to each of you, and that's basically looking to the coming years of XR, and we've all been in this space now for 4+ years. Looking to the next period of time, sort of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, what change that the pandemic brought do you think will have a lasting impact looking into the future? And or that doesn't have to be just one, but what change or changes do you see sticking that emerged because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think it's pretty fundamental. I think XR has had kind of a moment in the light right now. In the States, I'd even go a step further that this what I would call social AR has like risen to the fore here, like Snap playing with their lenses and world lenses, and then Facebook has a product called Spark AR. And arguably that's doing more for consumer education and consumer onboarding of XR than anything Oculus has ever done. Like that's just and it's doing it without the heavy language of XR and immersive, and like it's just something fun and kind of forgettable you do on your phone. But it's training people in a way that's, I think, pretty foundational, and that technology is being used every day by hundreds of millions of people. And that, with us now being sort of locked in and XR having a bit of a moment, I think it has done more for the XR uptake in industry in this 1 year than had the pandemic not happened. It would probably take another 5 to 10 years to get this level of like education and awareness and adoption. So I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but I just feel like we've experienced something rather unprecedented, and I think there's no going back. I think these technologies will now see a level of adoption, and not just adoption but acceptance. I think there's always been kind of this like kind of a nerdiness to it, and it's this box on your face, and like who wants to do that, right? And so I think there's a level of acceptance now that we've also started kind of broken through, and so yeah, I guess that's kind of where I see things going.
I'd like to throw another thing that I didn't touch on, which is I think the pandemic, because recently I've been working with the biggest biggest shows and performance company in China, and I think not only in China but also all the performing art companies around the world. I think they are transforming themselves into to embrace new ways of connecting with audience, right? By even doing like performing art and shows in VR chats, or all those different kinds of online platforms, including Twitch, even YouTube. So I think this pandemic really changed people's ideas on how they could connect with each other, and also by by doing different kinds of performances using virtual platforms and virtual technology, allowing them to connect with audience they would never be able to connect with before. So I know that, the what's it called, Tender Claws, Real Shakespeare companies, national theaters, and all these Punch Drunk. Now, all these companies been using technology, new technology to create their new audience, and those audience are naturally accepting this new forms of performance. So I think this is also a fundamental change to not only the performing art crowd people, and also those shows operators or show runners, as well as the young generations of audience who are very open to new forms of performing entertainment. And I think that change is also fundamental, and I can see there is a new waves of opportunity out there in the coming years, when there is new forms of shows to be produced and to be deployed using different distribution channels, whether online or hybrid. I think it's really exciting to watch that trend too.
I will put it short here. From efficiency view, I think people are already getting used to the situation that sometimes we cannot travel, and sometimes we don't have to travel because of pandemic. And then we realize, okay, there are ways we can working together, communication with each other and coordinating with each other was a good synergy when we are not able to travel. And people start to getting used to that. So I'm sure that people will see how we can leverage the technology that we have already had to further improve the efficiency when we cannot be really like together physically together. So that for sure will be seen in different situations, like remote communication, remote designing, remote maintenance, or remote inspection. And on the other side, from entertainment view, I think people are definitely exploring what more fun we can have. Either when we are at home or after pandemic, we definitely need more fun.
You can never have too much fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been really amazing. It's been an honor to have this conversation with all of you.
the last word. Can I say the one more thing?
Please, please.
Yeah. So this year's Sandbox Festival, we are going to have both physical and online component, virtual component, and I hope everybody can join us for the gathering, and really hope to see everyone coming over and join us.